All right, I think we're reaching max capacity. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time today from your busy lives to join us for this action party. I'm Liz Bridgewater, the Director of Outreach at Climate Action Now, and one of the many people who work to bring this action party to you today. I see a lot of new names and faces on the call, which is really awesome. If this is your first ever action party, let me give you a very brief overview. An action party like this is an opportunity to learn about important environmental issues from people who are experts in their field. In the course of the same hour, we're going to use the Climate Action Now app to take action together. The Climate Action Now app makes it really easy to send well-researched, personalized messages to political decision makers and business leaders. And the really awesome thing is that it works. Action parties have helped to pass key legislation around the US already. For more information, we're dropping some useful links into the chat now. To get you started with the action taking portion of tonight, I'd like to hand the spotlight over to Kaylee Beam, our Director of Content. Over to you, Kaylee.
All right, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to pull up the goal tracker and get you all ready to take some action tonight. So let me just share my screen really quick. All right, so hopefully we're all seeing this. There we go. So if you're an action party regular, you already know all about what this is. But if this is your first time, let me walk you through what we're looking at. So on the left side, we have the goal tracker, which is this lovely little globe that will fill in and iterate as we take action here tonight. On the right side is a QR code, and that's what we're going to use to get you all in the app. So the first thing I need everyone to do is take out your phones. All right, open up your camera app or wherever you go to take pictures and point it right at the QR code box on the right side of the screen, right under where it says current action. A tablet will also work if that's your device of choice. So as you're pointing your camera at the QR code, a little yellow bubble that says Climate Action Now should appear. Once it does, go ahead and tap on it. And if you don't have the app already, tapping that bubble will take you to the App Store where you can download it for free. And then once you have the app, just follow the prompts to sign up. And once you've made your account, all you need to do is point your camera at the QR code again, and you'll go straight to the We're Still In Action Party campaign. If you already have the app and you're all signed in, scanning the QR code should take you right where you need to go. So I'm just going to give everyone a minute to get in there. If it's not working for you, don't worry. You can also go to your phone browser and type in the link that's directly under the QR code, the one that ends with We're Still In, and that will take you right to the campaign if you have the app, or to the App Store to download, just like the QR code does. And of course, if you're still having trouble, just feel free to message me directly so we can get it sorted out. We want to make sure that everyone here is able to take action tonight. So yeah, once you're in, feel free to take action all event long. We'll be hearing from 4 awesome speakers tonight about what can be done at the state and local level to advance the climate movement and sending good, innovative ideas to our own legislators through the app. And I can already see that people are in there because we're already at 177 actions, which is amazing. So our current goal is to hit 500 actions, but I can already tell we're going to get there pretty quick. So just keep it going and we'll set a new goal if we get there and just see how far we can go. So I think that's everything from me. Back to you, Liz.
Thanks so much, Kaylee. And I'll also just add a reminder to folks that we will be recording the meeting tonight. So if you need to drop or anything, you'll get a recording. If you have any friends you think would like to see it, you're also very much welcome to pass that along to them. So now, while you're getting the app downloaded, I'd like to introduce you to 4 incredible students from Cornell University who were instrumental in getting the actions prepared for tonight. I'm going to pass the spotlight to the students for a moment so that they can share a little bit with you about what their favorite actions were that they created.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. I'm one of the Cornell University students. My name is Osita. And just a quick thank you to everyone for being here and to the speakers for being willing to share your experiences with us. So one of my favorite actions specifically is Portland's creation of a clean energy community benefits fund. It's essentially designed to provide money for general climate action projects that advance both climate justice and social justice. And so kind of addressing this intersection to me is super important. And so that's kind of one action that I was pretty excited to learn more about. And I can pass it on to Caroline.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline. I'm also a student at Cornell. And one action that I did some research on and learned about this semester was about soil health. And this is actually an initiative that's taken in Oklahoma. And it provides technical assistance and financial incentives to encourage healthy soil in Oklahoma. And it's a program that can be replicated across many other states. And it encourages long-lasting environmental benefits by supporting the soil, such as decreased dependence on fertilizer and pesticides, and also increased crop yield. And with that, I'll pass it on.
Hi, my name is Faith, also one of the Cornell students, and one of my actions that I wrote was the tell your state reps to set a coal phase out timeline. My focus was on energy, and I was really interested to see or shocked to see that not a lot of states, even climate heavy hitters like California, hadn't set a phase out plan for coal. So that was one of my favorites that I researched. So I'm going to pass it to Jade.
Yeah, hi. So the action that I wanted to talk about today is the Minneapolis, sorry, I'm trying to pull up the exact source, but the Minneapolis City Council moving forward on carbon fees of big polluters within their city. And I found it really interesting. We almost didn't post this action, but it turns out that we have 60 users in Minneapolis. So if you're from Minneapolis, shout out. But then there's also a sort of connected action to encourage your own city council members to implement a carbon fee on the major polluters in whatever your area is. And I think that that is, yeah, that's one of the most important things that we can do and one of the most effective actions. So on a local level, it can have a lot of impact.
Awesome. Thanks, Jade, and thanks, everyone. I really appreciate you guys sharing, and it's been really awesome to work with you throughout the semester. I'd like to also extend gratitude to Dr. Marianne Krasny, Director of the Civic Ecology Lab at Cornell University, and Climate Action Now's Director of Food Policy. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, Elders Climate Action, and the Climate Reality Project New York Chapters Coalition. Finally, a special thanks for our moderator tonight, the incredible Jessica Craven, author of the hugely popular Chop Wood, Carry Water Substack. Jessica is an ardent champion for climate and other progressive causes. We'll put a link to Jessica's Substack in the chat. With no further ado, over to you, Jessica.
Hi, everybody. You guys got my cat Walter, who is also here for the ride today, as he often is. Hi, it's so good to be here and always an honor to moderate events with Climate Action Now, one of my favorite organizations. And I really mean that. For those of you who don't know me, I, among other things, do have a newsletter in which I give people simple actions that they can take to be engaged with politics and our democracy. And climate is one of my top issues. He's so cute. And I discovered Climate Action Now quite, whenever you guys started, I think a couple years ago, and I was just floored by how well the actions are curated and how brilliantly smart they are and how easy they make it. As someone who writes actions myself for my newsletter, I know how much it takes to write a good email, make sure you have the right email address. And I'm just messed that up today on an action that I did, by the way. So like, they are so careful. Every detail is really attended to, and these are effective things that we can do. This app is one of the greatest things that has come out of the last few years for the climate movement, and I love it. So really happy to be here. And with that, we've got a bunch of great speakers today, and you certainly don't need to hear any more from me. I want you to hear from them because they are so fantastic. So we are going to start out, let's see, with Ruby Winsell, who is the Policy and Research Manager at Climate Exchange, a nonprofit organization working to advance equitable state-level climate policy. She manages the State Climate Policy Dashboard, an online tool with information and resources on over 60 climate policies across all 50 states, and leads the organization's policy tracking. She authors research and analyses on climate planning, environmental justice, energy modeling, and other areas of climate policy, and has experience advising on policy design and drafting bills across states. So I'm going to introduce Ruby to you, and just a friendly reminder as we go through all these great speakers that if you have questions for them, please drop them into the chat. There will be a time for us to try to get to a few of them. All right, with no further ado, here's Ruby.
And I'm sorry to jump in right before Ruby starts speaking, but we are not even 15 minutes in and we have already hit our first goal. So good work, everyone. Look at those beautiful fireworks flying. I'm going to go ahead and update the goal. Feeling ambitious. What if we go 1,100? And let's just see how far we can go. So keep up the good work, everyone. You're all amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hi everyone. Like Jessica said, I'm Ruby Winsell. I work at Climate Exchange. We are a national nonprofit focused on state level climate policy. I'm going to send links in the chat to both the Climate Exchange website and the State Climate Policy Dashboard, which is what I'm here to talk about today. So I have a couple slides that I will share and then do a quick walkthrough of the website, show you how it works, how to find what you're looking for. But we Climate Exchange relaunched the State Climate Policy Dashboard about a month and a half ago. It was on the Climate Exchange site. Now it has its own dedicated site because we wanted to do a bunch of things, improve functionality, add a lot of new data and analysis, and add new tools to the website as well. So we wanted to simplify everyone's research journey by hosting all climate policy information in one place. It's accessible, it's free and available to the public. We track 62 policies across all 50 states right now. That list of policies is going to grow year by year. We have a few dozen policies under consideration to add. It's accurate, so we update it at least twice a year. We're hoping to do quarterly updates, but we'll see on capacity. And we use a variety of policy tracking methods. We use a policy tracking software. We crowdsource a lot of information from another program of Climate Exchange called the State Climate Policy Network. You can find more information about that on the CXC website. But that network is made up of state and local actors across the country working on climate policy. So we collect feedback, we have review processes. So we really want to make sure that this is accurate and up to date. And it also features resources from over 100 organizations. This could not have been done without everyone's amazing research and work. So we really want to amplify other organizations' research as well as our own on the dashboard. Like I said, we include 62 policies. We have 7 policy areas. That's that left darker column. Climate governance and equity focuses on climate planning, setting emission reduction targets, incorporating environmental justice into climate policy, as well as a handful of just transition policies. Cross-sector looks at economy-wide policies, including green banks and carbon pricing. And then we have 5 sector-based policy areas as well: electricity, buildings and efficiency, transportation, industry, material and waste management, and natural and working lands. And I took notes of what the Cornell students were talking about because we do cover a lot of the policies they mentioned. So I can use those in some of the examples. Really quickly on the methodology, the main thing I want to highlight is this left graphic is the homepage map. And if you hover over it, you'll see for each state, we have 4 different policy statuses: enacted, in progress, partially enacted, and not enacted. enacted means that the policies exist in the states, it's on the books. Most of these are through legislation, executive orders, regulation, rules, etc. But it could be like a program creation, or a lot of times some policies such as green banks aren't established through legislation, but still exist in the state. In progress is showing policies that are required to be developed. And so an example of that is Oregon passed legislation in 2022 to require the development of an environmental justice mapping tool by next fall. And so that policy is in progress because it's required to be developed, and the state is developing it now, but the tool hasn't been finalized and released. The dashboard isn't a policy tracker, so you won't see bills under consideration by legislatures right now. But I think it's a really great tool to understand the landscape of policy in your state, what has been done, what are opportunities to increase ambition in your state, and kind of bring in ideas across state lines. A lot of the actions that the students mentioned again are on the dashboard. You can see the status of your state for those policies, and then as I'll show a little bit later, the dashboard also highlights model rules and model states for every policy. And so you can see kind of how your state compares to those. I might skip this for the sake of time, but and just show you some features while I'm walking through the dashboard, but some key features being able to identify state-specific opportunities, like I just mentioned, comparing policies across states and sectors. On state pages, you can visualize greenhouse gas emission projections through 2050. Right now, a lot of those feature business as usual, but over time, we're gonna have more modeling on what emission look like through 2050 with your state's current policies on the books, and then also if we identify key policy opportunities, so the highest impact policies, how would that change emissions through 2030 or 2050 as well? And like I said, we have model rules, we have state examples, and we have key resources on our policy pages as well. And then lastly, if you are working directly on policy in your state, you can request technical assistance from us. That is something we also provide. That can be done through, there's a button on all of our policy pages as well. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing slides. I'm going to go to the website. Like I said, here's the homepage map. The last two statuses to define partially enacted is we do incorporate a couple organizations' data into the dashboard, and they break their policies into components. This is getting at like more specific aspects of the policy's design, so not just whether it exists or not, but kind of doing a deeper dive into the policy's quality as well. And then not enacted means it hasn't been passed in your state. It's either missing all components, or if it's not a component-based policy, then it has not been established in law yet. Really quickly, I'm going to go to a Massachusetts state page, just show you kind of ways to identify opportunities. So if you wanted to only see policies that haven't been enacted, you could click this. You could see Massachusetts relative to its region, but kind of overall on the homepage is doing pretty well on climate. They have a majority of the policies that we include enacted or in progress. A lot of these sector-based bars are pretty far along in their progress. This is just signifying the number of policies in our policy framework that the state has enacted. Here are those emission projections, like I mentioned. You can see even business as usual, which does include federal funding implementation. It does include renewable portfolio standards. So you can see that Massachusetts is declining over time, but that particularly buildings is still making up a pretty big chunk of the state's emissions. And then here's kind of the meat of the dashboard. You can explore all policies by state, including their status. You could filter by whatever status you're looking for. If you're interested in a specific policy area, maybe you're interested in environmental justice, and so you only want to look at climate governance and equity, and specifically our categories of EJ and equity and just transition. And then I'll just highlight that you can expand each policy and get a little summary of that state-specific policy. And we also link directly out to the establishing policies. So we make it really easy to find the actual policy text, because I know from personal experience, it is very difficult to find a lot of policy and to actually understand what these documents are saying. So we do that for you. I'll just quickly go to a policy page as well. I'll go to food or industry and show you food waste, because that was also something that was mentioned. So this is a policy page. We do provide a brief description of the policy. Here's that request policy assistance button, a 50-state map by status. This is a policy where it's only enacted or not enacted, so not super interesting map, but you can see a lot of these food waste bans and targets are concentrated in the Northeast as well as some on the West Coast. Like I mentioned earlier, we do have key resources to learn more about those policies, and these specifically focus on the policies at the state level, as well as model rules. So these kind of provide template text for policies, and you can plug in state-specific information there. So we have actually a handful for food waste bans and targets. Not all policy pages look like this, but including one to establish a food waste ban to divert food waste from landfills. We do have a local model compost rule template as well. And then here we highlight some model states. So this, I think, again, can provide a little bit of reference for these action parties. And with that, I can wrap up. I know we have a bunch of other great speakers. The last thing I'll highlight is our state comparison tool. You can select up to 4 states and as many policies as you want here and see a side-by-side comparison. So if you wanted to see how your state compares to the Healthy Soils program in Oklahoma, you can do that. Coal phase-outs, carbon pricing, again, a lot of those policies that the students mentioned. But thanks so much, and I'll turn it back to Jessica.
Thank you so much, Ruby. That was amazing. And really fascinating. Okay, we are going next to, let's see, I think we're going to Maddie Godby, who is the Policy and Communications Coordinator at People for Bikes. Maddie supports the local innovation team's advocacy efforts to create and protect safe, fun, and connected places to ride a bike. In fact, we read about one such place in our actions, or at least I saw that as one of our actions to read about. I think it was Cambridge, Massachusetts. Totally fascinating. Anyway, back to Maddie. After spending most of her life training for and competing in the Olympics for cycling, Maddie can now be found enjoying bike rides at a much more leisurely pace that usually involves stopping for treats at a local bakery. So don't forget, keep dropping those questions in the chat, both for Ruby and for Maddie and all of our speakers, and we will get to them after. And now I give you Maddie Godby.
And I'm going to jump in and be really rude again, because as you can see, we are past our goal of 1,100 actions, which is so amazing. Great work, everyone. I'm gonna update our goal one more time and let's see if we can reach 1,500 by the end of the event. So I'm gonna get that updated, but back to you, Maddie.
Great. Thank you for having me. And I will share my screen. Can everyone see it okay? Awesome. All right. As Jessica mentioned, I work on state and local policy at People for Bikes, which is a national bike advocacy organization, as well as the US Bike Industry Trade Association. And I will be talking a little bit about how bikes play a role in climate policy. So for context, the transportation sector is the highest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in the US, contributing nearly 1/3 of all emissions. And most of these emissions come from passenger vehicles like cars or light-duty pickups. And despite improvements in fuel efficiency, emissions have continued to rise due to increases in vehicle miles traveled. And this can be explained by the theory of induced demand, or when increased roadway capacity causes congestion to increase, not decrease, as more people drive more often. Additionally, fleet electrification, or shifting from gasoline to electric vehicles, is a critical component to reduce emissions, but it's not enough to meet climate goals.
And Maddie,
Even-
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we're just seeing your first slide.
Oh goodness, my apologies.
No worries at all. There we go. Looks great. Thanks so much.
All right. And so even in electric vehicles, people still need to drive less. And so, for example, studies in California have found that even if the state meets its ambitious target of 15% zero emission vehicles on the road by 2030, which in reality is 10 times the current adoption rate, every person in the state still needs to drive 4.5 fewer miles per day to meet the state's 2030 climate target. And so to reduce vehicle miles traveled, facilitating mode shift from driving to forms of active transportation like biking or walking, or other alternative modes of transportation like taking transit, is necessary. And in theory, this shouldn't be that hard, as over half of car trips made in the US are 3 miles in distance or less, and nearly 1/3 are 1 mile in distance or less. And 3 miles is equivalent to, on average, only a 20-minute bike ride. So this indicates that shifting these close to home trips is possible. And in addition to the obvious climate benefits, investments in active transportation infrastructure facilitate mode shift, also provide a lot of other co-benefits, which you can lean into with messaging to different policymakers. And these include improved access to an equitable form of transportation that is much cheaper to own and maintain and reduces the significant cost burden of car ownership, particularly for low-income populations. In most cases, it's a form of exercise and can meet daily exercise guidelines that reduce chronic disease risk and improve mental health. An active transportation infrastructure sparks economic development and thriving connected communities. And so without safe and protected infrastructure, we know that people will not walk or bike. And so due to safety concerns. And these concerns are valid because serious injuries and deaths of vulnerable road users have significantly increased year over year. And so People for Bikes' Great Bike Infrastructure Project aims to create safer and more connected places to ride for people of all ages and abilities. And the legislative arm of this campaign supports the most successful policies to accelerate the construction of safe and connected places to ride a bike so that more people can ride more often. And we measure infrastructure project through our city ratings program. And so one of the policy pillars of this campaign is advancing bike infrastructure through climate legislation. And we have found that the best ways to prioritize bikes in climate legislation are to set specific reduction targets for both greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled, establish strict requirements for accurate reporting to measure and track impact, include transparent accountability measures to ensure compliance, prioritize investments in historically underrepresented communities, and include electric bike incentives. And so diving into some examples, Colorado was the very first state to get greenhouse gas emission reduction legislation on the books in 2021 with their GHG planning standard. And so this legislation mandates that the Colorado Department of Transportation must assign GHG reduction targets to metropolitan planning organizations and run modeling on transportation sector emissions. If modeling results do not show alignment with the targets, the MPO must implement mitigation measures like active transportation infrastructure to reduce and offset these emissions. This policy has already diverted funding from planned highway expansion projects to multimodal transportation projects totaling over $1 billion. And by 2050, Coloradans will have saved over $40 billion from implementation of the planning standard. And these are not intangible savings that exist in some far-off universe. These are kitchen table savings for everyday people. And next, Minnesota got GHG reduction legislation on the books in 2023 as part of an omnibus transportation funding bill that also included a statewide e-bike incentive program. And learning from Colorado, this legislation went one step further to include vehicle miles traveled reduction targets in addition to GHG reduction targets. Minnesota also included a provision, a very important provision, that mandated prioritization of investments in historically disadvantaged communities. And following Colorado and Minnesota, several states have introduced this legislation in 2024. And although none of these bills passed, they will be reintroduced. The CETA in Illinois was expressly introduced in 2024 as an education play to build momentum for passage in 2025 or 2026. So sometimes it takes a couple of years to get climate legislation across the finish line, but there is public appetite for investment in a more holistic transportation system, so dedication and consistency are key. And dedicated funding for active transportation infrastructure is an important component for getting these policies and projects implemented, and ballot measures are an important and common funding mechanism. People for Bikes tracks and engages on pro-bike ballot measures across the country, and in 2024, voters approved a historic amount of funding for bikes, $27.4 billion over the next 25 years. And some examples of these successful ballot measures are the Portland Clean Energy Fund, which was approved in 2018, to invest in community-led projects that reduce carbon emissions with a focus on communities of color and low-income communities who bear the greatest burden of climate change. And the fund supports both bike infrastructure projects around the city, as well as the city's e-bike incentive program. And like I mentioned earlier, this most recent election was a huge year for bikes. And voters in California approved Proposition 4, which is a $10 billion climate bond, and provides significant funding for both active transportation and recreational trail systems within the context of natural resource conservation projects. Similarly, the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund Amendment was also approved and reauthorizes $1 billion in state lottery revenue for conservation projects like bike trails. And sometimes we need to be defensive, though, as in the case of Washington State Initiative 2117, where voters actually voted to reject a measure, but this measure would have repealed the state's Climate Commitment Act, which is a cap and invest program that provides funding for climate projects, including $1.3 billion for bike infrastructure. But because voters rejected it, funding remains safe and available for these climate projects. There were also a variety of conservation bonds overwhelmingly approved by voters in red areas like Florida, and these included funds for bike infrastructure, showing that this funding is possible even in areas that aren't historically progressive like some of these other examples. Leaning into messaging about access to trails and economic development instead of climate, equity, or even health are more bipartisan and can increase the chance of success. And typically measures must be referred to the ballot through the state legislature or city council, so you can write to your policymakers in support of these bills and resolutions that dedicate funding to conservation projects. And so on this note, other ways that you can get involved, use our data-backed talking points and policy examples for inspiration. You can measure and learn how to improve your local bike infrastructure through our city ratings program. And you can also utilize other resources like Rocky Mountain Institute's Smarter Modes Calculator or their e-bike calculator to quantify the benefits of these infrastructure investments. And combine this data, as well as your personal story or the story of your community about how an e-bike incentive program supported local small businesses or how a new bike trail got people moving and deepened a sense of community. And ask your policymakers to support policies that mandate investments in active transportation infrastructure and a more holistic transportation system. Thank you.
Okay, that was amazing. Thank you very much, Maddie. Keep those questions coming in the chat. And now we are going to hear from Diana Robinson. And Diana is the Environmental Project Specialist for the City and Borough of Juneau. Diana's sustainability work includes sustainability planning, implementing sustainability projects, assessing program effectiveness, and conducting policy and technical research. Diana is also the staff liaison for Juneau's Citizen Advisory Committee, the Juneau Commission on Sustainability. Diana received a Master of Science focused in environmental sustainability from the University of Edinburgh. Lucky Diana, that sounds so great. And I really look forward to hearing from her. So Diana, I'm going to pass it to you. Keep those questions coming in the chat, y'all. Diana, you're muted.
How about now? Did that work?
Perfect.
Yay. Okay. Thank you so much, Jessica. Like she mentioned, I am the environmental project specialist for the city and borough of Juneau, Alaska. And yeah, I'll just get started right into it here. And I work in engineering and public works, which I think is a little bit, a lot of sustainability coordinators type of positions often are in like community development. So it's been very interesting for me being in engineering and public works because I have a whole new perspective on infrastructure that I did not have before I took this job. All right, just getting right into it. So Juneau is the state capital of Alaska. It's in the region kind of referred to as the Alaskan Panhandle. It's Southeast Alaska. It's the second largest municipality in the US by area. So it's bigger than Rhode Island and Delaware, and we only have about 32,000 people. So if you can imagine, that's not a lot of people over a lot of space. We're also not connected to a highway system or a rail line. So the only way to get goods and people into Juneau is through plane or boat. And I just wanted to give you a little illustration of where we are. So down here is Washington. Up here's Anchorage. We're right smack dab in the middle. This is the entire, and the borough is essentially like a county in terms of how it operates. That's just to zoom in. That's the whole bureau. And again, there's Juneau right here. So yeah, we've got a lot of really unique challenges as a municipality. I'll talk about first some of our successful pro-climate projects. A big strength for a lot of Southeast Alaska is our access to renewable energy through hydropower. So, we have a lot of glacially fed rivers and lakes, and there's just an enormous potential for renewable energy here. And we're really making a lot of headway in that transition away from fossil fuels, which a lot of home heating in this town is actually fuel oil, which is basically diesel, and it's an old school boiler and it's very expensive. We also have some infrastructural things that are pretty cool. We're a big cruise ship town. I don't know if anyone's ever taken an Alaskan cruise, but you've probably stopped in Juneau. We had the world's first electrified cruise ship dock back in 2001. Unfortunately, they're very expensive, and we haven't been able to upgrade any of our other cruise ship docks yet. We're hoping as our state is starting to understand the benefit of not using as much fossil fuels for energy, and the import, air emission issue for a lot of these communities is a big concern. So we're starting to see a lot of support at the state level, which is pretty cool for a state that's as rural as Alaska is. We also have a lot of successes with heat pump adoption in this transition. And we've got a couple of programs that are pretty unique, I think, in terms of different communities I've worked with. It's called Alaska Heat Smart, and they're a nonprofit that helps low income, but also just, middle class, upper class, everyone figure out what the best heat pump is for their home. They provide free energy audits for that. And then there's also a local credit union that has a low interest loan program for heat pumps, which is pretty great. Those things, you know, it's a big chunk of change up front, but you can make up those costs pretty quickly if you're switching from fossil fuel to electricity in this town. So those two programs have been enormously successful. The city of Juneau supports Alaska Heat Smart. Every year we provide them some funding, but they did just receive a huge CPRG, climate pollution reduction grant for about $11 million to expand throughout the state. So that's very exciting for us here. And another thing that Juneau really has going for it is its EV adoption and charging infrastructure. Because we're such a small town, you know, the longest stretch you can drive is about 50 miles. EVs make a lot of sense here, and our climate is pretty perfect for them. It doesn't get too hot, it doesn't get too cold. So a lot of EVs, you know, with early models of EVs kind of come to Juneau, and they just get a second life up here because we don't have to go that far. And I've never lived anywhere that has as many EVs as this town. As Jessica mentioned, I'm also the staff liaison for the Juneau Commission on Sustainability. They were kind of, you know, the early adopters of a lot of our climate strategies, and really pushed a lot of this stuff really early on, especially again for a state like Alaska. So we've had a climate action plan since 2011 and an associated renewable energy strategy that they updated in 2018. And as you can see, we've done some emissions inventories over the years, and we have had, you know, a pretty sizable reduction, especially in the CO2 emissions, if you see over the years there. So we're working on finding a new contractor to perform another GHG inventory, just to kind of get more accurate numbers. 2021, as we all know, was kind of a weird year. So, okay. And this is just more about our EVs. We have a lot of EV charging infrastructure in this town. Every EV charger in this town is free and publicly available. The city itself owns 12 of those charging sites. We're an ever expanding EV fleet for our city. We've got Chevy Bolts. We just got a Ford Lightning as kind of a test to see, you know, our more like our mechanics and our streets folks, transit people. They're a little nervous about switching over to EV, so I'm really excited to see how they like this Ford Lightning. We're also moving forward with a lot of electric buses. So in 2021, we got a grant and purchased a bus by Proterra. Unfortunately, that company and that bus really did not perform how we wanted it to, and this most recent past funding year, we received funding for 7 buses that will replace the diesel buses, and then 6 additional buses. We just received word that we'll have funding for those also, and those will actually be to expand our bus fleet. So that's very exciting, and we hope that these buses work better for us than the first one did. Like I mentioned, we have a lot of tourism from cruise ships. You know, it's something like 16,000 people just from the big cruise ships, not including the smaller ones. It's just an enormous amount of people every single day in the summer, and it goes from early May to the middle of October, and it can be hugely disruptive for a lot of people who live here. And you know, we are a relatively small community, and for a long time, the cruise ships were using some of our infrastructure kind of to the detriment of the rest of the community. So in 2019, and then again in 2024, we've been working on an MOU with the cruise ship industry, which has actually really given us some great returns. You know, the cruise ship industry is kind of notoriously litigious. They sometimes are hard to work with, and we have an excellent tourism manager that has done some great things. She got them to stop using our landfill, which I'll talk about later. They limited the drinking water purchases. They, you know, limited the number of people that came into town. And maybe most importantly, which is separate from this MOU process, we receive what are called marine passenger fees, and that's kind of like a head tax. So I think it's $8 per person coming off these ships, comes to the city and it goes into a pot, and it can be used for projects that there's a nexus between the cruise ship tourism industry and city needs. So things like new bear-proof trash containers for downtown, which is actually a very big problem in this town. Is we've got what we call trash bears, and the tourists really love to see them, unfortunately, and it's a pretty dangerous mix. So we're trying to reduce those interactions.
Diana, I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
We very quickly have to move on to our next speaker because she's got a hard out.
Yeah.
Maybe we could just like a 10-second wrap up.
Yeah, let me zoom through. So a big thing, I'll just play this video very quickly. It takes 2 seconds. We have been having what are called yoga loops for about the past 14 years. This is an emerging climate disaster, and they're just getting worse every year. This is a picture of the inundated neighborhood. So, these are some of the big ticket struggles that we're dealing with. That's a picture from this year's flood. Solid waste, I'll skip through that. And then I just want to throw in some tips for some engagement. Do you know how your local government works? Because it's not the same as state government. It's not the same as federal government. They're pretty different. So look into that. Check out the needs and priorities of your community. Go to public meetings. Remember to be relevant and respectful. That's very helpful. Is there a citizen board and committee? You should join one. And yeah, I'll end it there.
Okay, and I'm so sorry. I hate interrupting people, and this was so fascinating. I would like to listen to an hour-long presentation about what you guys are doing there. Thank you so much. People will keep dropping questions. We're running a little behind our time, so I think what's going to end up happening is we're going to take questions after the hour because our next amazing speaker has to leave at 5 o'clock exactly my time. I'm in Pacific. So let's get to her before we do anything else because she's going to be great. So we've got Assembly Member Dr. Anna Kellis, representing the 125th District of New York. Before becoming a state assembly member, Anna served in the Tompkins County Legislature. In her tenure on the county legislature, she crafted legislation and effectively championed many public health issues, including access to affordable housing and walkable communities. She also authored environmental legislation, such as an initiative to block state permitting of a proposed trash incinerator on the shore of Cayuga Lake. Anna earned a PhD in nutritional epidemiology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. All right, I can't wait to hear from you, Anna. Let's pass it right over so you have as much time as possible.
Wonderful. Just want to make sure y'all can see my screen. I'm going to try and switch it to a slideshow, hoping does that make it better? So I'm going to go through crazy quick because I have about 150 bills that I champion. Could not give all of them. This is a smattering of some of the kind of work that I do. One of the bills that I championed and passed in my second year in the legislature was a cryptocurrency mining moratorium. There were cryptocurrency large corporations that were buying up power plants and putting cryptocurrency in them, significantly increasing our base load of energy for our entire state. So I was successful in creating a moratorium, but more importantly, requiring the environmental department here in New York State to do an environmental impact statement. And that has actually led to the entities not getting their permits renewed. Those are now in current lawsuits. So it's been very important. I have a climate prevention cap and invest program. This is not a cap and trade program. It's a cap and invest program bill that I have. I just did a presentation to all my colleagues. This would require that large polluters have to buy allowances in order to continue to pollute, and those allowances get more expensive, and the number of allowances decrease over time so that it would incentivize polluters to transition on a renewable energy infrastructure. I have a Native Seeds Promotion Act that is on the governor's desk or headed to the governor's desk. I'm hoping that she will sign, that will require the prioritization of the use of native seeds in New York State, any government projects. to promote the reintegration of native seeds and native plants in the state. I have a bill that was just signed, or that is soon to be signed, also headed to the governor's desk, that would require the development of EV charging station expansion in government garages and parking lots. I have several bills focused on PFAS. This is the forever chemical that is highly correlated with cancers, endocrine disruption, highly toxic in particular to people who are immunocompromised, pregnant, children, because it creates developmental disabilities issues. So this would require disclosure from all major wastewater entities that produce wastewater and release wastewater into our ecosystems, so that we can collect all the data. Another Open Water Data Act that follows a national advisory sort of request, I guess, if for lack of a better phrase, and would collect all water quality data across the entire state. New York State has 95% of all surface fresh water. New York State, or the Finger Lakes and Great Lakes, so not just exclusive to New York State, but most of it is in New York State. But 95% of the surface fresh water in the country is in the Finger Lakes and Great Lakes. So this is really important. Another bill that prohibits the sale or land application of biosolids from wastewater treatment facilities if they exceed the drinking water levels of PFAS levels. But these biosolids have about 80,000 man-made chemicals in them. And so, it's really important that we are not spreading them in our farmland. Instead of on our landfills, we should be reducing the amount of PFAS that's going into our water and wastewater streams to begin with. But in the interim, spreading them on our farmland and ruining it permanently, given that PFAS are forever chemicals, is not the solution. One of the ways to get rid of them from the point of it entering into our waste stream is by requiring that washing machines have microplastic filters. So that's another bill that I have. I have one that prohibits the sale and continued use of polystyrene docks. Would create an incentive program for those that have polystyrene docks that creates microplastics that destroys ecosystems for water. And another that requires the conversion. Oh, this was one that I already passed in my first year, but it requires that the State Department of Transportation, instead of only doing mowing along highways and on medians, to plant pollinator species, particularly to promote pollinators. So now I'm going to shift gears really quickly and just talk about two of my biggest bills. One of them is the Fashion Act. And so I will just go through these really quickly. It's a tremendous amount of slides. I do multi-hour long presentations on this internationally around the world. So I'm going to try and go really quickly. But the reason that this is really important is because the fashion industry is responsible for up to 8% of all the greenhouse gas emissions on the planet. And it is the second highest for child labor, and in the top 5 for slave labor. So a very toxic industry, and it has been lining its pockets and not delivering for the people because it's been externalizing all of the costs, such as mental health, economic health, public health, and environmental health. I refer to it as trash fashion. It's the largest advertiser on social media because they manipulate our, people psychologically, getting us to believe that you need more and more and more, using influencers, paying influencers. That's the entire process, and feeding into an addictive culture. So, one of the things that I do point out to people is that there is a massive shift in trash fashion. Shein is one of the top brands. They produce 1.3 million items. That's annually. So that's new items annually. And even other fast fashion companies like H&M and Zara are nowhere close. So you think of Shein, Temu, they blow everybody else out of the water, and they're taking over the entire industry. And they produce clothes to be worn once, but they are also very toxic for other reasons. There are more than 8,000 synthetic chemicals used in the fashion manufacturing process. A recent investigation found that 15% of Shein's products contained concentrations of hazardous chemicals that breach EU regulations, and excess levels of toxins were found in Shein and Temu's child items, things like formaldehyde, plasticizers, phthalates that we know are very toxic. Big fashion is one of the highest consumers of energy, water, raw materials, farmland, and one of the greatest contributors to air pollution, biodiversity loss, and climate change. One of the things that I also talk about is the biodiversity loss specifically. So the fashion industry is projected to use 35% more land for fiber production by 2030, an extra 115 hectares that could be left to preserve biodiversity. Just giving a sense it's going in the wrong direction. It's a very expensive industry. Although clothing is getting cheaper by the dollar amount that you buy when you wear it once, because they're only worn once and fall apart, and people are encouraged to buy more. People are buying more and more and more clothes. The ultimate cost to them is actually more money, and what ends up in the landfills is an unbelievable amount of clothing. So we produce 17 million tons in the United States per year, China 20 million tons. So China's the largest, we are the second largest, but they have 3 times the amount of population that we do. So per capita, the United States consumes the most fast fashion and sends the most to landfills. I have created the Fashion Act. There are tons of brands that do support it because it would actually safeguard American brands on the international market, because the EU has already passed the equivalent of the Fashion Act. So I will walk through what this means. What this bill would do is it requires that brands that produce over $100 million gross revenue, global gross revenue, would have to comply with the Fashion Act in order to continue to sell in New York. So even though it's only a New York bill, it would have a global impact. And what they would need to do is map their entire supply chain. And there's 4 different tiers in their supply chain that goes all the way from the tier that produces the clothing all the way back to the farms, and that's tier 4. So there's an entire plan of what they would have to map, and then that would have to be publicly available. And then they would have to measure their baseline risks, so GHG emissions, using science-based targets, their wastewater chemical concentrations, both inputs and outputs, and then track them and report them. Then they would have to show that they are reducing their impact, reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, reducing their impact on water quality, and reducing their total environmental impact over time. And if they don't, they can be held accountable for not meeting the New York State Fashion Act. And that is the most important part about this. The bill outlines the fashion sellers cannot pass this on to the manufacturers. So they are accountable for reporting. There's clear outlines. There are clear outlines for regulations. The verification process of their reporting is done independently. They pay for it, but it has to be done by an independent verifier. But the most important piece is that we have an enforcement piece, as I said. So if they do not comply, by reducing their emissions and their chemical impacts over time, they can be fined up to $15,000 per day per violation until they rectify both their reporting and reducing their impacts. Any funds that are collected go into a community benefit fund that can then benefit the very populations that are being negatively impacted by their practices. Another bill that I wanted to end with that I work on, that I'm working on right now, that is a priority of mine, is the GAP Fund. And the GAP Fund specifically addresses the fact that in New York State, we have the oldest housing stock in the country. The average across the country is 39 years. In New York State, it's 62 years. Buffalo is 63 years, the oldest housing stock in the country. And this would specifically create a funding mechanism for low and moderate income families to access funds, grant funds, in order to retrofit parts of their homes so that they would be eligible for an existing grant program that creates energy efficiencies. So we have an energy efficiency program. Low and moderate income families can apply for it. And that does things like insulation, solar on the roof, air source heat pumps. But if they have an infrastructure problem of their buildings, they don't qualify for the grant. So if you're a really low income family and your roof is too old and caving in, you don't qualify for the program. Or if you have black mold in your walls, you don't qualify for the program. So the people who tend to have those issues are the lowest income people with the oldest buildings in the state. We don't want them to not qualify for these energy retrofits because we know that we will not reach our extensive climate goals as a state. We have to reach energy neutrality by 2050, 40% reductions by 2040. We will not reach that unless we specifically get reductions in the housing stock, because that plus transportation are the two largest contributors of greenhouse gases in the state. So this slide specifically talks about the population it would address. Almost 70% of the tenants in buildings are low and moderate income that would be eligible. More than 1.3 million units in such properties are heated by non-electric equipment that's over 15 years old. So we know that this would have a benefit, helping us reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Inadequate electrical systems to handle the installation of high efficiency heat pumps. So again, we know that they need this, what we're calling a gap fund. This is just a quick slide to show a significant amount of our GHGs come from the building sector, 32%, transportation, 28%. So this is absolutely necessary. And we know that a significant amount of it is coming from heating, 55% for space heating, 75% for water heating. You can see an inefficient envelope, inefficient roof. These are all the ways that these buildings are inefficient. So we know that we need to do energy efficiencies, but if they don't qualify to do it, we won't reach our goals. So the Green Affordable Pre-Electrification Gap Fund, which is a bill that I'm prioritizing this year, addresses barriers, home energy efficiency upgrades for these home energy efficiency upgrades that are not covered by the existing programs, by funding this gap, by helping them get the black mold out or replace their roof, and then sending them back to Empower Plus so that they then would qualify for those energy efficiency grants. The GAP fund would pay for things like health hazard remediation, structural repairs, electrical upgrades, moisture control, safe removal of fossil fuel appliances and systems. So those are just some examples. And this is just the last slide. How much will the GAP fund provide? For a residential building with up to 4 dwelling units, that's up to $40,000 per unit, where owners or tenants have incomes of up to 80% of the state area median income, whichever is greater, and up to 35% per unit where owners or tenants have income between 81% and 150%. So that's where we're covering both low income and moderate income. For a residential building with more than 4 but less than 50 dwelling units, it's slightly lower, but we still do have that scale. So that's 25,000 and 20,000, because of course, if multiple units in that building qualify, it will still cover the needs of that building. For a residential building with more than 50 dwelling units, of course, then it decreases again so that we can spread out the benefit of this. And, anybody who knows New York City, 50% of our population lives in New York City, 50% outside of it. We wanted to create a structure so that it will benefit the entire state and not be sucked up by just the urban areas. That's why we created, these thresholds throughout the fund. So these are just some examples of legislation that I carry. These are some highlights. The Fashion Act and the GAP Fund are 2 of my primary target bills for this coming legislative session. That starts in January, goes through June, so wish me good luck. Please reach out to your legislators and get them to co-sponsor these bills if you are a New York resident, and I will end there.
Wow, thank you so much, Assemblymember. That was unbelievable. I mean, honestly, I could have listened to every single one of you speakers on your own for a long time. But as someone who really cares a great deal about fast fashion, that last part was inspiring. All of you were inspiring. Thank you. I know it's really late and I know the assembly member has to jump off, or I think she does.
Yep.
We're going to do a few questions. I am not going to do them because I too have to jump off and take my kid on an errand. So I'm going to pass it over to Liz Bridgewater, who will take questions. And I hope a few of you can stay on because there's probably so much more to learn. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Jessica, so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jessica, and everyone. Just before Liz gets to it, great work. We more than tripled our initial goal and you still blew it out of the water. So you're all amazing. Thank you for all of the amazing action taking today. And I'm just gonna hand it over to Liz to ask the questions.
Thanks so much, Kaylee. And I know our other speakers have other things to get to as well, so I'm actually just going to ask one final question to wrap us up. I'm so sorry, everyone, that we weren't able to get to your very wonderful questions. I really appreciate you putting all of those into the chat. So for our remaining speakers, the question I would like to ask is if there is a number one thing that you could say to everyone on this call that they could do to help make a difference going forward, what would be your recommendation for everyone?
I will just say before I jump off, I think that we all need to ask ourselves how much is enough, and what brings us happiness. And I think that separating out our happiness from consumerism in general, that every single thing that we use does make a difference in simplifying our lives. There's something really quiet about that. And figuring out ways to share that as a way of living in joy, so that we are not spreading what can feel like judgmentalism from people, out of when we get scared or we feel overwhelmed. Sometimes it can come across that way and we end up turning people off. But if we can feel the joy in ourselves of just a simple life where we find love in breathing fresh air, being with each other, it actually is simple, but it can make a huge difference.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
And, write your legislators. It does make a difference. Bye, everyone. So sorry, and thank you for the comments. I was reading them. I have a coalition that we are building with states with 2 others that are waiting to see what happens in New York. But because the New York Fashion Act requires all fashion companies, even if they're not New York State, it will affect the entire United States. So, and globally. So that's important to know. But I'm so sorry, everyone. You are all amazing, and the speakers, you're brilliant. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member Kellis. All right, Diana, Maddie, Ruby, anyone want to hop in on that final question?
Sure, I can go next. I'm not stealing it from someone in the chat, but I was gonna say it anyway. I think just finding ways to talk about climate with everyone in your life. I attended New York Climate Week this year, and there was a panel on like how being an active part of your community is really important for like climate resilience. If you are facing extreme weather and you're not able to evacuate, maybe you can carpool with your neighbor or something like that. It's just really important to be engaged with your community, talking with everyone in your life about climate. I think people who work in this space and volunteer in this space, it's very apparent all the ways that climate change impacts your life and how widespread the benefits of climate policy are, but everyday people might not know that. And so it's important to point out that it's not just about the planet getting warmer, it's about jobs, it's about economic benefits, public health benefits, safety, and so much more. So, yeah.
Yes, I love that. Climate is about so much more than just greenhouse gases. So thank you for sharing that perspective with us, Ruby. Diana and Maddie, anything you want to hop in with here?
I'll hop in. one piece of advice that this community has learned the hard way, know your emergency management plans. Know if your community has an emergency management plan. We're going to start seeing more and more big natural disasters in places you didn't think that there would be a natural disaster. So get ready, you know, it's that same advice, have a go bag. Know if your municipality has plans for disasters. FEMA has programs that you can learn about how to respond to disasters and their certificate programs. Yeah, I just highly recommend looking into that for everybody.
Yes, that's wonderful practical advice. Thank you for sharing that with everyone. And then Maddie, you want to bring us home with some final comments?
Yeah, and finally, I think just continuing to show up, and even if there's small changes, those all add up. For us in the transportation advocacy space, like building a new transportation system and reimagining it, it can be really hard. And so just continuing to show up, work on what you can and make those small changes, and it does add up, and it does create that change, the broad systemic change over time.
100% agreement there. I feel like all we can do is those small steps one day at a time. I want to say a big thank you to all our speakers. You guys are so awesome, and I really appreciate you spending time sharing your expertise with us today. Also, a big thank you to everyone who joined the call today to spend time out of your busy lives learning about climate and taking action on it. If you like what we're doing in these action parties, please consider becoming a Climate Action Now member. It can be as little as $4.95 per month, and that helps our very small bootstrap team keep doing this work. That brings us to the end of this action party. For our speakers, if you still have some extra time to share with us and want to hop into the debriefing breakout room, we'd love to see you there. Otherwise, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. Have a good night.